Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman Podcast.
I think the first thing that changes is that your competitors are going to change their behavior. So you may have desperate competitors doing desperate things. I think a lot of companies are really hurting right now and willing to do things that they wouldn't have been willing to do before. I think being focused on ROI and understanding what's changed about your customers' businesses and where their heads are at right now is really important.
Hello, Sales Nation. My name is Will Barron, and I'm the host of the Salesman Podcast, the world's most downloaded B2B sales show. On this episode, we have the legend that is Steve Benson. He is the CEO of Badger Maps, and he is the host of the Outside Sales Talk podcast. And on today's episode, we're getting into how you can outsell the recession, how you can thrive, not just survive, but thrive during the recession. And then we get into how field salespeople, if you're listening to this and you're driving around like I used to, like a madman in my car around Yorkshire selling medical devices, if you're in field sales, there's a ton of value in this episode specifically for you as well. So with all that said, let's jump right into it. Okay, so on today's episode, we're getting into how we can outsell and outpace and outmaneuver the recession, if it's possible. Hopefully it is, and we're going to talk about it on today's episode. But to just frame things up, to tee things up, what changes for salespeople in a recession, other than the very obvious that perhaps buyers are being a little bit more tight with their money?
Well, I think the first thing that changes is that your competitors are going to change their behavior. So you may have desperate competitors doing desperate things. I think a lot of companies are really hurting right now and willing to do things that they wouldn't have been willing to do before. So that includes things like deep discounting, that may be liquidating their inventory just to make ends meet. It may be giving away free consulting or other free, low-cost but valuable things to steal customers away from you. Also, your interactions with your customers, your customers and your prospects may provide more challenges, and things may be different there too that you'll need to think about. You'll feel resistance from them on different things that wasn't there before. They may not want to engage in a sales cycle. They won't want to meet in person, which for good reason oftentimes. If someone didn't want to engage or meet with you as a salesperson before, now they have a fantastic excuse, right?
Yeah.
So I think resistance to spending money is another area of resistance that you may run into. In a lot of cases, there's a spending freeze coming from the top of your prospective or customer organization. And then aggressive procurement offices, right? So there's another thing that you'll have to deal with going forward. I think procurement offices, they're looking to leverage the down economy to get discounts, to get better terms, and frankly, just to generally jam down your margins. And don't forget, procurement professionals are basically professional negotiators, right? I think when does a professional negotiator stop trying to get concessions out of you? It's the same way. I've always liked to think about it the same way that you would stop wringing a wet rag. You stop when it stops giving water, right? So you're going to have to stop giving concessions at some point to them and recognize when you're in a zero-sum portion of a negotiation, as opposed to a win-win part of a negotiation where you're creating value for both sides. And hey, they have a great excuse to try to twist your arm right now for a few more concessions, and it's their job. But it's our job as salespeople to be prepared for those negotiations that are coming.
How much of all this, Steve, is psychological versus you mentioned some hard things there of the company's liquidating and they're trying to make payroll. But how much of it, putting that to one side, let's say that the people we're dealing with are the surviving, like everyone is. We're plodding along, we're managing, we're not perhaps having the best year of our lives, but we're doing okay. How much of all of this is psychological versus there is a hard budget cut coming from the top?
Well, I think it depends. In some cases, it's a very hard budget that a lot of businesses that maybe your prospects are just their revenue's been massively reduced, and they're looking for places to cut costs, and they just have a spending freeze and a new hiring freeze in place, and they're trying to get water off of the ship to keep it from sinking, right? In other cases, not much has changed for the prospect that you're talking to, and this may be prospect by prospect, it may be industry by industry. I mean, this has been good for some companies, bad for some companies, and in most cases, it's probably just a bit bad for them, but not catastrophic. So it kind of runs the gamut, but in some it just really depends on the industry. But I think in a lot of cases you are running into just a psychological problem that can be overcome with by empathy and reading the situation and overcoming the objections that are at hand, and communicating things like the ROI and why they'll be better off spending money on this thing that you have, this service or this product, because it's going to help them make more money or it's going to save them costs. So sure. I think it's both.
Sure. Okay, well, let's narrow down the focus of the conversation then. Let's say Sam is selling to companies that are not obvious sinking ships. Sam's done his research, he's done his qualification, and so he knows that the company is at best doing great, at worst they are surviving. There's not mass layoffs or anything like that. When Sam goes into these conversations, other than things like empathy, which we can come back to in a second perhaps, what should the conversation look like, or how should the conversation have changed other than here's my product, here's ROI, here's what we can do for you? Should Sam be changing the context of his conversations because perhaps the buyers will have an overarching now different priority than before, where perhaps the priority 18 months ago, even a year ago, was just growth?
Yeah, I think there are a variety of things, a variety of ways Sam should try to fix the conversation and should have the conversation in a different way. I think being focused on ROI and understanding what's changed about your customers' businesses and where their heads are at right now is really important. And there are strategic things that Sam can do too. And I think one thing he can, the empathy thing, I think everyone would say is an obvious one right now. And we all have one huge, larger thing in common with our customers right now. So we do have one more thing that we're all the humans are kind of in this together. And so that's something that we can talk about, right?
Sorry to interrupt, Steve. So this is a weird question. How do we talk about, for example, COVID, recession, these kind of things, without it just seeming like we're just paying it lip service? Because I've had so many emails over the past few months going, "Hey, Will, hope your family and yourself you're well," and then blah 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 blah, just like a pitch puked out at me. So how do we actually use empathy in this kind of scenario as a strategy that is actually useful, as opposed to, again, just paying it lip service?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's dangerous to just pay it lip service. Like you actually have to listen and make sure that you understand what's changed about their business, right? Or you have to better understand what's going on with them. And this experience is very different for different people, right? Some people's lives are extremely affected, and other people's lives are changed a lot less, right? I mean, if you were an introvert who lives alone already, maybe things haven't changed all that much for you.
Sure.
But if you have a 14-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 7-year-old child, and you live with your elderly mother, and so you're at high risk, and you've got kids in the house that are climbing the walls. This is maybe your life has been more affected. So I think both on a personal level, you need to have that empathy. And then also, I think on the business level, understanding how have things changed. Some businesses have changed a lot. Some businesses this hasn't changed all that much. But I think that's really the key to empathy, is recognizing that when you're looking at things through their shoes and understanding standing in their shoes, that they have very different experiences, and genuinely caring and being curious about what those experiences are and talking to them about it is a key to connecting and understanding where someone's coming from in these times.
Sure. So it seems like we need to, rather than just, I guess paste is the word I'm looking for, paste these so-called empathetic statements. We need to ask some questions and then genuinely refer back to the answer to those questions. I know this sounds ridiculous, but I'm just seeing so many people like just spamming out these COVID messages, and it was worse kind of 6 months ago when it all started off and the lockdown started. I think people are getting a bit bored of sending them themselves now. But I'm not. No one has sold me, and I don't think I've tried to do it myself. No one's tried to sell me. No one has successfully sold me, Steve, on an empathetic conversation about what's changed in my business. Have you had anyone reach out to you and do any good sales pitches, or have you seen anyone do this effectively?
I think it's a really tough thing to do over email. Sure. It's tough, and the challenge with email is you can't listen while you're doing it, right? Mm-hmm. So you're only talking. And so I think that, it's maybe not the best conversation to go deep on or to bring up too much over those types of environments. Maybe it's just best to give a nod to and then discuss what you want to discuss. But yeah, I mean, to your original question, I think that there are strategies that you can implement in these times, or things that you can do that will help and will change the way things are going. That are new ways, or even getting back to the basics on certain things that are really useful today. A good example being, I think it's more important now than ever to leverage your sponsor in a sales cycle, because you don't have the same eyes and ears on the ground that you would have in a normal sales cycle, because you're not getting face-to-face with people. Especially in a complex sale, you need to leverage that sponsor now more than ever before, really. I mean, I think people are experiencing longer sales cycles. People are experiencing less customer loyalty. And it's because they don't have kind of their finger on the pulse of their customers the way they do. And it's harder to communicate in these environments. Your sponsor is rarely the only decision maker, and especially in an environment where the purse strings are tight, back to what we were talking about before, you can ask your sponsor before a meeting with their broader team to try to uncover for you by using their interpersonal relationships with those people that they have that you don't. You can ask them to overcome to uncover those objections that other people may have from the other decision makers, other influencers, and that way you can address them in meetings, even over the phone. You can also subtly prepare them and kind of in one of these pre-call meetings to bring up key questions or make key points that you really want to facilitate during the discussion with the broader team. So I think your relationship with your sponsor is so much more important when you're pitching remotely. You just can't, because of the way you can't read the room, you can't get all the information that you can get in a face-to-face situation. You can't read body language. You also lose that natural chit chat that builds rapport, and you might not get the relationship in place with every decision maker that you would have been able to in person. And so you need your sponsor to help you with that, and also to follow up with all those decision makers and influencers and get genuine feedback on your behalf. And then you can work with the entire team to move the deal towards closure.
If, Steve, we only had, say, 100 units that could be spread across different parts of or different sales skills or different parts of the sales cycle, what would have gone down and what would have gone up in this period in the eyes of a really successful salesperson, perhaps even a field salesperson who is now not able to go and see their customers? What are they doing less of, and what are they doing more of to have success?
Well, I think the biggest metric of success and the biggest focus that I think salespeople are going to be looking at right now is profitability or revenue, just like it always has been. But I think the best reps right now are going to be focused not only on these metrics, which are actually lagging metrics, right? They're the revenue you get today or the profitability that is generated today is reflective of what you've been doing, depending on how long your sales cycle is, maybe for the last year, right? So I think a good headspace for a sales rep to put himself or herself into is looking at more forward-looking things and focusing there. So, qualified leads, pipeline building activities. How many proposals am I getting out to customers or prospects right now? And this is tricky for a sales rep because right now the CFO or the leadership team at your company, they might be pressuring you to just focus on the revenue or the profitability because cash is king, right? And that's what's paying people's salaries and keeping factories open. But it's your responsibility as a rep to remember to keep an eye on building pipe, and that way you'll be able to generate revenue in the future, right? So if you are having trouble there building pipeline, you got to look at the things like lead gen numbers and scheduling qualified meetings. If it's more of a middle funnel challenge, then the focus could be more on number of presentations made or number of proposals to decision makers. And if it's closing deals that are the challenge, then it's maybe looking at your negotiation skills, value selling skills, digging into qualification questions to make sure that you were selling to the right people to begin with, right? Because you can't afford to waste time now. So that's another thing to focus on. Also, discounting can really eat into your success in a down economy as a sales rep, especially if you're comped on profit and not top line revenue, right? I mean, remember, if you're comped on profit and your profit margins are 30% and you give away a 15% discount, you actually need 2 deals to be worth what a non-discounted deal was worth, right? So if your comp plan is aligned with profit, not revenue, you need to get a lot more deals. And when people are squeezing you for discounts, you need to really increase your deal flow. Now, if your comp plan is aligned with revenue, that's less of a problem because that 15% discount only costs you 15% of your commission, right? But I think that focusing on negotiation training there and revisiting that can be really valuable for a sales rep in these tough times.
Is it fair to say then that we should be going back to basics with a lot of this? Because what you just described there, Steve, is basically what salespeople should be taught in year 1 or 2 of their career. And then they start getting fancy, right? They start using different automation tools and the cadence for this, and they're trying to implement a personal branding campaign on LinkedIn. They're doing all those different things, which clearly we talk about on the show all the time and are somewhat important and can perhaps build on top of the foundations. But is the answer to all of this just to go back to basics and start doing what we should be doing as salespeople every day?
Well, yeah, to some degree. I mean, I think there are the fundamentals are always important and almost always, worth revisiting and learning about. I feel like every time I read a sales book, it reminds me of something that I'm like, yeah, that's also important. And I know it's important, but I don't get to it, right? I mean, or I don't think about it on a regular basis. I don't think to talk to my sales team about it. I think there are certain basic skills that are so important right now that you need to focus on in a down economy more than ever. And one that jumps to mind is negotiation that we talked about. Another is qualification. I think qualification is more important now than ever. I mean, obviously sales 101, right? But it's more important now than ever before, because if there's a reason that a deal can't be done, there isn't time to waste on sales cycles that can't be successful. And there's a lot of companies and prospects out there that just won't be able to spend money right now, or are just gonna go with the cheapest product available no matter what. So if you're dealing with something like that, you've got to identify it and qualify those deals out, right?
Yeah.
And people are usually honest, right? They don't like to disappoint you, but if you ask the right questions, they will qualify themselves out. I've got a good strategy for doing that.
Steve, do you and your team have a specific way of qualification, whether it be BANT or one of the other acronyms? How do you guys go about doing it?
Well, what I usually try to get my team to do is to ask. So the people that I generally work with, when they're talking with their customers, right? So Sam, your guy, when Sam's talking with his customers, he can say, well, the people that I generally work with come in two categories. Category one, they're leaning towards moving forward now. Category two, they're leaning towards being worried or about they're worried about making changes in these times, or they have something that keeps them from making a change right now. Which category are you in? And a lot of times the customer will they want to be they'll be honest with you, right? Like and that can elicit an objection that you can then overcome, or you can qualify people out with that, right?
I love that. So what I typically do, but this is more straightforward and you've got to have a bit of trust and rapport built. But I would ask the question, does it make sense to move forward with this now? If they say yes, great, carry on with things. And I'm closing this constantly throughout the sales process, every conversation, right? If they say no, then I'll just follow up with, well, what would make sense, or what would be a good next step, or what's stopping you from moving forward? So I think we're on the same line here. We're trying to get the customer to coach us on how to proceed, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And you always need to qualify people out, or else you're going to waste a lot of time. You devote your resources, your company resources. It doesn't help you to write a quote or run sales cycles, build proposals, and for a customer that actually there's no way they can buy.
Mm-hmm. Of course, and now I guess we're all coming down to crunch time now as all this kind of develops and budgets and funding and cash in the bank kind of dwindles for a lot of companies, right? So with all this, Steve, so the audience know my background in medical device sales, driving around like a madman in Leeds and North Yorkshire, delivering camera systems and endoscopes and speaking with surgeons. How has all this changed for field salespeople? How do they outsell a recession? How do they have success? Because it's one thing for me to be on the phone with a surgeon and pitch him a product or ask him if he wants to upgrade this or go through that. But a lot of my time was spent in theaters, stood next to the surgeon, handing him bits of equipment. How does one do this in an environment where that clearly isn't happening anymore?
Absolutely. There's a big challenge not being able to get face to face with your customers, and for some types of salespeople far more than others. Obviously, med device sales, where you're where you need to show them the thing and get in front of them and get their attention. A lot of things are just best sold face to face, and now fewer deals are going to close, and it's harder to communicate value if you can't do that. Sales cycles take longer. Maybe the relationship was important in your sale, and it's just harder to build the relationship. That you can be at a real disadvantage right now if you're in field sales, and some deals just have been made impossible. Now, that being said, I think the you can still stay productive and keep generating new sales cycles and moving existing sales cycles downfield, even if you can't demo your product in person, can't get face to face with the customer right now. One strategy is to focus on filling the top of your funnel right now instead of focusing on the middle or the end of the funnel. The beginning of the funnel in many cases will be easier to succeed at remotely. So do more prospecting, build more lists, get your awareness up in your territory. Spend time building relationships with your ideal customers in any way you can, right? Things like social selling, right? It's a great time to invest in your social selling skills and your presence there in the social network world. And this is obviously a topic big enough for 5 books, but throughout the crisis, we've looked carefully in my company at our social selling and what we're doing, and I've had several top social selling experts on my podcast, and this is really very valuable stuff to look at. I think it's social selling right now because it's a way that you can generate new leads. It's a way that you can deepen relationships and keep things warm with your existing customers. I think it's really important to just keep moving sales cycles downfield and keep setting things up. There's an analogy I use with my sales team. It's a bowling analogy. So usually sales reps are setting up 10 bowling pins in a month, right? Mm-hmm. And then they roll the ball during the month and knock down as many pins as they can. And not being able to get into the field can be a real impediment to closing but that doesn't mean you can't keep setting up pins. And then when the world comes back online, you'll get to roll the ball. So maybe you don't set up 10 pins. Right now you focus on the setting up, and you set up 100 pins in a row, and then you're going to get to roll the ball eventually through all those pins, right? So you build the relationship, and you help those customers understand how they're going to benefit from your solution, and how to count every dollar that they're going to get from it, and when they do get to an economic situation where they're able to move forward, you're all teed up and ready to get that deal done. So focus on how am I going to do in the next year, rather than what am I going to close in the next month, and that can be a way you can be successful in these hard times.
So I know clearly you're not an economist, but after every recession, there's a boom period, right? Do you think that's what is happening naturally in the economy, where people are focusing on just lining things up, putting those pins down, and then when the whatever's holds back the economy kind of lifts, with it obviously being COVID this time around, or the subprime mortgage fiasco last time around, then all of these pins get just smashed in one go, and we have these boom years?
Yeah, I think that happens a lot, right? I mean, things get set up right now. People evaluate things. They have time to evaluate things. So that's the we may end up with something like that. And if we talk again in January of 2022, we'll be saying, wow, it was the back half of last year was we just murdered it. And that I think people are picking up the phone right now. They are engaging with new products and services because they have to, right? They're picking up the phone. Like the decision makers that you wanted to get a hold of a year ago, and it would have just been impossible to get in front of them. Now they've got time to pick up the phone. They're working from home. They're quarantined. They're bored. They're lonely. They're being forced to take a look at solutions and products that will make their business better, that'll bring in more revenue, cut costs, help them be more efficient. They're willing to talk and engage. So a sales rep that's running some plays to get more people on the phone right now who are actually answering, they're going to be able to set up more deals, more bowling pins. And so it may be a good idea for a sales rep to shift more of their time right now towards that lead generation to really set themselves up for a great year next year. Because we're in this for the long haul, right? You can also think about talking to management about enlisting help from other areas of the organization that might have some slack to help you generate more leads for the future. Like someone who works in the deployment team normally, or the customer service team. Maybe those teams have slack and they're not fully utilized, but they could be making calls into your territory to generate leads and setting up meetings for you, right? I think I read a survey right before coronavirus. About a third of all salespeople spend zero time prospecting. And that now is definitely the time to double down on prospecting and get more done, get your message in front of your buyer, build out your pipeline, because the down economy, it motivates buyers to find new vendors who can help them solve their problems.
Yep. I've been saying this for months now, Steve, and I think we're on the same wavelength here, that buyers, so me, it's mainly CSOs and chief revenue officers that we sell our training to. They're now so much more focused on what they want that when I get on the phone with them, I can qualify them in an instant, versus before everyone was getting a bit fancy. It was, we want a bit of social selling, we want a bit of this, we want a bit of that. We're concerned about our profile on LinkedIn. And now everyone's like, well, we want these two things and nothing else matters. And so as long as what we do aligns with that, the sales are coming in relatively easy, and there's budget there for a revenue generating activity, which obviously sales training, when done well, can be. So I'm totally agreeing with what you're saying, and I'm finding practically that we're getting the same results and the same responses as well.
That makes a ton of sense. Yeah, and I think that it can, people are open to these ideas right now. It can be helpful, like in your business, to shift, and I guess this is true for any business. It was certainly true for us. It can be helpful to shift the way you're reaching out to people, shift your messaging to some degree, because they may respond to different things. But I think they are picking up the phone and responding. In a down economy, the messaging might need to be a little different. Like the one thing that we did, we changed our messaging from will help you do better, which is kind of very common messaging. And this is something that I'm sure, I would imagine, would be doing too with sales training. You're reaching out to a CRO or a VP of sales and saying, hey, we're going to help you do better. I think if you change that messaging to will help you do more with less, then your next step is to show that prospect how much more in terms of exact dollars you'll help them do better. You'll help them do more with less. And this could be less money, it could be less manpower, it could be less resources, but probably they have less. And that messaging may really resonate with them. I went through this exercise with my sales team and then again with my marketing team, and just to drive home that we wanted to shift our messaging to this. And I'm talking, when I say messaging, I mean the top of your web page, the things that your homepage, things that you've been saying for 10 years in good times may need to shift in these times. And we changed ours. And I think and so that's something to revisit. It's what's coming out of the salespeople's mouths. It's what it's the homepage. It's everything. But in our case, it was, we'll help you sell 20% more with your field sales team. And we changed it to, with Badger Maps, your outside sales team can generate the same revenue, even though it's 20% smaller. And that's a very different message saying the same thing, but we found that one message resonated way more with our customers right now.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. And Steve, you mentioned, hopefully we'll have you back on in the not too distant future, but if we project forward to 2022 and we could just come off the back of this killer year, the economy is crushing it, Badger Maps and Salesman.org have blown up, right? What do you see is going to trend, or what trends do you see that are going to take us towards there? What's happened now that's going to continue even when coronavirus with vaccines and hopefully it all dies down eventually? What trends have started now that will continue to that bumper year of 2022?
Well, I think I think that remote work is a trend that we're going to see a lot more of. Now that being, so teams are going to be working remotely. From a field salesperson's perspective, I think that may involve more travel to reach their customers. Once you're able to reach your customers in person, it's still, you're going to be doing more travel and more getting in front of them because they're still going to want to meet face to face. And there's so much value to it.
Do you think we're going to be popping around people's houses for cups of tea?
I think public spaces, things like Starbucks, are and bars and restaurants will get a resurgence because people will need places to meet, and they'll it'll just be harder to get everyone together, in the office because people will have moved to other states, countries, areas. I think we're kind of seeing. It's unclear whether people are going to be able to claw everything back, but I think people will be really starved to get back together with people face to face. I think we miss it. I think it's hard. I think this is a very hard time for humans because this is not how we're good at living. In these kind of lonely, separated times, right? It's really hard to replicate the connection that you can make with a customer in person, over Zoom or over the phone. Obviously, the internet interactions, I think by nature are clunky. They're awkward. In-person meetings, you just have a better opportunity to connect and really understand a customer, understand their problems. And we thrive off social interaction, right? I mean, in person, you tap into the human need for connection, and people love having long lasting relationships, right? It's not to mention, it's so much harder to read the room, get objections, gauge how people really feel about you, your product, the system. I think, one thing that'll drive that boom is that sales cycles will get compressed when you're able to get everyone into the room and have a face-to-face conversation once things open up a bit. And just the way they've in a lot of cases, we're not getting fewer sales cycles right now. We're just getting less revenue because the sales cycles are taking longer. It's harder to get approval. It's harder to get things done, harder to move things to the sales cycle. And so that feeling of expanding a sales cycle means there's less sales today. But at the same time, on the other hand, when the sales cycle compresses, we'll get a lot of stuff coming in all at once.
Yeah, I was going to say the only thing that could turn this on its head, especially for field salespeople, would be if Apple finally drop the AR or virtual reality glasses that they've been rumored on. But even then, it wouldn't be the same in a meeting because I think culturally, everyone would have stupid filters on, even on Zoom and Skype, their backgrounds. We'd all be sat on some kind of like weird castle doing a negotiating, and you'd be negotiating with a dragon and a panda. It's clearly not gonna. It's not going to be effective as effective as sitting in a boardroom, is it?
Yeah, I think we're humans, and we've been having human interactions forever, and we always will. And we've evolved over millions of years to have face-to-face interactions, and the other ways of doing things, although sometimes novel, ultimately you don't get the same connection.
No.
I liken this to dating, right? Like in both dating and sales, the internet may enhance things or give us new tools, or a dating app, swiping concepts, but the internet will never replace in-person dates, and it will never replace in-person field sales. It's just not the same thing.
No, that makes total sense. Okay, well, with that, Steve, I've got one final question for you, mate, to wrap up the show, and that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what is one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
I would have learned to communicate in the language of return on investment, ROI, with prospects and customers earlier. What do they get in terms of benefits that they can count in terms of dollars when they purchase your product? If you can communicate that effectively in almost any sales situation is enhanced by communicating that, because that's, in a B2B world, at least, and this obviously, isn't really B2C, but as much. But in a B2B world, I think that is one of the key ways you can move something through an organization and get the sign off you want and need, get the approvals that you want and need, is to communicate in the language of ROI.
Yeah, I love it. I appreciate the differential there between B2C and B2B, because there's not really a good ROI conversation for buying the new $1,200 iPhone, right, when you've got the one prior. But in B2B, if you come to me and say, well, we're going to do this and this and drive X percentage of revenue, it almost becomes a no-brainer. It's almost, as long as you've got that level of trust that they're going to actually be able to implement it, and you want to use the product, it's not going to make your life difficult. It's almost sacrilege not to go with that, because you're there to grow the company, right?
Absolutely.
Good. Well, with that then, Steve, tell us a little bit more, we touched on it, about Badger Maps and where we can find out more about you and the podcast as well.
Sure. Well, Badger Maps is a company I started about 9 years ago. And what we do is we help field salespeople do a variety of things when they're preparing to be in the field or when they're in the field. At its core, and basically what we're doing is we're combining a map and a schedule and integrating it with your CRM and giving you a bunch of tools on your mobile device to, all in one little app, to basically be able to plan out your time in the field, focus on the right customers, given where you're going to be, build a schedule, rework your schedule as it gets messed up during the day, and do all this very, very quickly and very, very efficiently. So saving a ton of time and planning and keeping you focused in the right places. So that's kind of what Badger Maps does. I guess in terms of the best way to get a hold of me, I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. Just Google Badger Maps, Steve Benson, and I'll come up. That's I've got a podcast, Outside Sales Talk, which is specifically for field salespeople, and I bring experts of different skills in sales and people who've written books, et cetera, on the podcast, and they teach to salespeople things that are through the lens of knowing that they're field salespeople. But yeah, those are probably the best ways to get a hold of me and Badger. I mean, just Google Badger Maps, and find me on LinkedIn, Outside Sales Talk is the podcast.
Good stuff. And Sales Nation, everyone listening, if you are in field sales, if you're driving around like a mad person like I used to all day, every day, the Outside Sales Talk podcast is specific for you because it is just for field sales reps, right? And I don't think there's any other podcasts that are so niche down to that specific kind of listener persona, is there?
That's why I made it, because it annoyed me that there wasn't one. and all these sales experts kind of, they all understand it, like the special needs of field salespeople, but they maybe didn't write about it in their book, or they didn't, normally when they talk, or it's not focused on that particular group and their particular needs. And frankly, field sales, it's a rare group, right? Only about 15% or so of salespeople are actual field salespeople. So it's because it's a minority of salespeople. Educators don't tend to focus what they're doing towards them. So I kind of twist their little arms into focusing what they're saying onto that group of people. So it's really helpful.
Good stuff. Well, I'll link to the podcast and everything else that we talked about in this episode over at salesman.org in the show notes. I'll nearly let something slip then. And yeah, with that, Steve, I want to thank you for your time and your energy and your insights, and for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Absolutely. Well, it's been fantastic to be on the show today.